Good afternoon and welcome to the Midday News. Here's what we have in the bulletin. Constitutionality of pre-charge bail under the microscope. Agriculture Minister says sector is ready for significant investment. And later in sports, Issa Manning Cup and Walker Cup finals set for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Shane Masters, and here are the details. More concerns this afternoon about the constitutionality of pre-charge bail under the new Bail Act. Pre-charge bail has to do with arresting and detaining people who have not been charged. Details in this report. Human rights organization Jamaicans for Justice, JFJ, says Section 5 of the proposed Bail Act that allows for pre-charge bail should be removed as it could breach the constitutional rights of Jamaicans. Executive Director of the rights group, Michael Jackson, says the section could allow for an abuse of power by members of the state.
If it is that one's right to liberty is abused in the way that we have seen it, then we see that we may have certain constitutional challenges that may also cost taxpayers their money. That's one practicality we have to look at. And then secondly, there's no monetary compensation that can ever really assure someone who has not yet been charged, give them back their time, give them back what they have lost.
She further noted that there are instances where societal differences can be a hindrance.
For example, a person who is financially constrained may not be able to take up bail. And we have seen in other jurisdictions where high bail fees, if you will, for lack of a better word, have been used as a little loophole to ensure that persons remain in custody. And I think my colleague before, and in our presentation or submission, we did in fact mention whether or not there should be some guidance given what this new bail bill is contemplating around what the ceiling should be.
The JFJ Executive Director says following that, the individual on pre-charge bail may have to wait up to 2 weeks before they can go before a judge to determine if they are to be further remanded or released, which is concerning. For policy and advocacy specialist Jade Williams, she believes that under Section 5 of the proposed bill, there could be serious consequences for children.
The Act does not specify in relation to bail that children are to be treated in what is the best interest of the child. That is not specified in relation to bail in particular under the Child Care and Protection Act. Concerningly for that as well is that the child can be remanded legally under the Child Care and Protection Act into an adult facility. And if we are considering the provisions under Section 5 of the bill, then we have to raise serious concern about children being included in those pre-charge provisions as well, and what that might mean for their detention and what that might also mean for their ability to be released from detention. So
they were speaking on Thursday at a joint select committee of Parliament reviewing the Bail Act of 2022. The National Road Safety Training Program has hit a snag. That's according to the private sector organization of Jamaica, PSOJ, during a recent press briefing. As Sandy Williams reports, the organization believes the program needs more support.
According to the private sector organization of Jamaica, PSOJ, motorcyclists make up the highest number of fatalities from motor vehicle crashes. Westmoreland in particular has an annual spike in motorcycle fatalities. In 2020, a national road safety training program which targets motorcyclists was launched in the parish. Since then, there have been a reduction in motorcycle crashes.
The reduction in motorcycle road fatalities down 21%. And one of the key pieces of information that we have received from the National Road Safety Council is the fact that they have had none of their course participants involved in major or fatal motorcycle accidents in the West. I think that is a tremendous achievement.
George Overton is the chairperson for the National Security and Justice Committee at the PSOJ. He believes a lack of support has been threatening the sustainability of the program.
They are in the red because of what happened during COVID. They are in the red because of the lack of funding, and they are in the red because of the lack of human resources to really carry out the work that is required.
According to the PSOJ, since September this year, the parish has seen a spike in motorcycle crashes.
But the need to build it out across the island and to maximize the utilization of the 2 simulators that have been provided, and also to continue the program of helmet issuance to those who have been through the program, is one that will need the funding and support.
In the meantime, the PSOJ wants the government to implement structural road safety requirements such as speed bumps, more streetlights in poorly lit areas, as well as more signs to guide road users. They say poor road maintenance is also an issue. Sandy Williams, TVJ News.
Agriculture and Fisheries Minister Pernell Charles Jr. is insisting that the sector is ripe for investments with another double-digit growth forecast. He pointed to 6 consecutive quarters of growth, adding that the sector is still not even halfway in meeting the local demands of the tourism sector.
We saw our highest recorded level of domestic crop production, 770,456 tons. And that is the highest ever recorded in our country. And that beat by more than 70,000 tons the 697,679 tons for the year before, which was a record. And we are now online in 2022 to beat last year's record.
He was speaking after a tour of a $47 million agro-processing plant, the J. Ray and Nevy Foundation, at the Sidney Pagan STEM Academy in St. Elizabeth on Wednesday. Now, the chairman of the foundation explains that with the closure of the sugar factory, it was critical to provide the community with another viable economic activity. So far, there's been interest in some of the products made by the students, like sweet potato chips.
We have also started discussion with the tourism sector to purchase products. So, for example, now we are talking to Chaka. My understanding is that they're very interested, Taniki, right? We had a lot of discussion, so they're really waiting for us now to be able to come up and tell us exactly what we can produce, and to what quantities.
Opposition spokesman on national security Peter Bunting is refuting claims from Prime Minister Andrew Holness that the PNP prevented the government from using a state of emergency in 2010.
In 2010, you only needed a simple majority of the House to extend. That means you need 50% plus 1. The GLP had a majority in 2010, so that from you form a government, you could declare a state of emergency and you could extend it as you like. You didn't need any support from even one opposition member.
He argues that the measure did not work because of the government's own failures.
Andrew Holness, as leader of government business then in 2010, had the responsibility to ensure that for an important vote, all the JLP MPs were there to support their government. He failed in that responsibility, and so they did not have the votes to extend the state of emergency. Take responsibility for your own failure and stop looking to blame PNP.
Mr. Bunting says crime is just one of the failures the government is seeking to blame the opposition for.
Him say, oh, if the PNP were in government during COVID, the country would collapse. Well, let me just remind you, you were the one that said people could sleep with them windows and doors open if they had elected you. And you have failed miserably at that, so why you believe the PNP wouldn't have done much better than you?
Mr. Bunting was speaking at a town hall meeting at the Manchester High School on Thursday. A man is dead and 2 others injured in a shooting incident in St. Mary Thursday evening. The deceased has been identified as 35-year-old Martin Scott, a craft vendor of Huddersfield in the parish. According to reports, about 8 o'clock, patrons were at a shop at Stewart Town at the intersection of Fernandez Garden when gunmen entered and opened fire, killing Scott on the spot. They escaped into nearby bushes. 2 other persons, a woman who sustained injuries to her chest and left arm and a man who complained of burning sensation to his posterior, were both rushed to the hospital. The Orocabessa police are now investigating. And it's now time for the Business Minute.
The Jamalco alumina plant in Clarendon resumed exports during the September quarter, but also wrote off $3.8 billion worth of inventory. Jamalco went back to production progressively in the third quarter since the August 2021 fire at its powerhouse. The factory resumed production in July and returned to 50% capacity in August. Then in September, it resumed exports with an initial 63,000 metric tons exported to long-term customers. Noble Group did not explain why the inventory was written off, but it was the only impairment of its kind during the year. In business overseas, the recent rail workers' strike in the United States has opened debate over paid sick leave. It was a final sticking point between unions and railroad companies. An amendment from progressive Democrats would have given the workers 7 sick days, but only the broader bill made it through the Senate. More than 33 million civilian U.S. workers have no paid sick leave. A growing number of states, counties, and cities have been mandating the benefit in recent years. But the absence of a federal standard sets the U.S. apart from most industrialized nations. And coming up in the Business Review this Sunday, we hear the motivation behind a small artistic business creating fashions that are to die for. That's it for the Business Minute. I'm Cody Ann Barrett.
And now for the top regional and international stories.
In the region, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade echoes to this day, just as modern-day enslavement is growing. In marking the International Day for the Abolition of Slavery on Friday, Guterres says that societies remain scarred by the historical suffering of enslaved Africans. According to Guterres, marginalized groups are most at risk, and women make up the majority of these vulnerable groups. On the international scene, in the United States, the Minnesota Nurses Association says 15,000 nurses from dozens of hospitals have voted to authorize a potential strike. This is the second time this year the nurses union has authorized a strike, protesting unfair labor practices, including staff shortages, employee retention, and safety. The previous strike, which was in September, ran for 3 days. According to the Minnesota Nurses Association, the September strike is believed to be the largest private sector nurses strike in the United States history. And those were the top regional and international stories. I'm Sandy Williams.
And we head to a quick break. When we come back, we'll have your midday sports report. Jermaine Brown is standing by.